hear from Dr. Jeffery, Katherine Jeffery, is that we all share one thing in common. We're all the human species who want to be valued, right, and respected. And we want our opinions to be heard. We share the same emotions. We share the same fears. We share the same joy. And being able to figure out how to better understand each other, I think, is the key to success. You know who I am. I'm looking to learn who you are. And I think what we're going to learn from Katherine is that we are all the same, but we do have our unique and individual differences, and those differences can be divided into generations. So Katherine, I'm going to hand this over to you and let you take over, and I am just giddy about what we have the opportunity to learn together. Thank you.
I am also a Gen Xer, so I especially enjoyed that. Thank you. All right, I'm getting my watch out so I keep myself on time. So if I go over, let me know. First, I want to say it's great to be back in the Midwest. Am I on? Okay. I grew up in Ohio. I have family roots in Wisconsin. There's even a name of a road named after my dad's family somewhere in northern Wisconsin, which is kind of cool. But now I want to take you to downtown Chicago. And I want you to all imagine just for a moment that you live and work there. That might be painful for some of you, all right? And you work for a major accounting firm, right? And about a year before COVID hit, so I wasn't being heard.
They let me know they could not hear you.
Okay.
I said yes.
Okay, no problem. I use my hands a lot, so I will try to control myself. Okay, so about a year before COVID hit, you hired a 28-year-old that you believe is going to take your firm into the future. You're really excited about this guy. He's got the charisma you're looking for. He's got good intellect. He's got excellent experience for a 28-year-old. So you really put your full weight behind him because you're so excited about him. And you put him on a major project team with one of the senior partners so they can start, building that relationship, right? So it's now time for the very first meeting of this major project team. And everybody's gathered around the big oak conference table overlooking Lake Michigan, except for the 28-year-old millennial. Now, as the person that stuck your neck out for him, you start to get a little bit nervous. You immediately pick up your phone. You say, hey, Joe, where are you? He says, what do you mean, where am I? You say, that meeting, it's starting right now. We need you here. He said, oh, well, it's a gorgeous day in Chicago. I figured I would just call in from the lake. Okay. Now, that's a true story that actually happened. And when I tell that story, I usually get one of three reactions. The first one is I can literally see people's necks turning red because they're angry just imagining that scenario taking place. The second one is people kind of scratch their heads and they're like, I don't really know what Joe was thinking. And the third one is, well, of course that's what Joe did. That makes all the sense in the world. Now, one thing I can promise you is that Joe, the 28-year-old, did not wake up that morning going, I hope I do something today that makes my boss want to fire me. That was not his goal. It's not at all what he was trying to achieve, but that's almost what happened to Joe. Now, for those of you that care, Joe did manage to keep his job, and it took several conversations in talking the CEO and the partners kind of off that cliff, right, of wanting to let him go. But they were able to rebuild that bridge and kind of that huge generational divide and disconnect. They were able to come back together, right? So the reality is, regardless, I know you're all in the same sector of the workforce, right, in your jobs, but regardless of what sector you find yourself in, this generational tension is real. It's happening. Doesn't matter, big company, small company, whatever the company's about, it's real. And this is the first time in history that 5 generations are working side by side. Now, I just learned a couple weeks ago that scientists are saying that the first person that's going to live to 150 years old has now been born. All right? And so if you can imagine, right now we have 5 generations. Well, that means, well, if people are living that long, we're going to have 6, 7, 8 generations. So we're really going to have to figure this out and learn how to get along. Okay? Now, for those of you that like numbers, which I'm assuming most of you do in this room, right? Katherine, give me some stats. Why should I care about this topic? The Economist did a survey, international survey of CEOs. This is kind of a year before COVID hit, and found that in North America, the #1 diversity issue reported by CEOs was age. Age discrimination lawsuits are at an all-time high. Older people are experiencing it for obvious reasons, and younger people are also feeling it. They're afraid to say, I'm a millennial, because they're afraid they're going to be stereotyped so bad that they're not going to get that promotion. So I've literally had millennials say, when I go to work, I dress like a Gen Xer and I talk like a Gen Xer. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that means, right? You'll have to ask them, but they're truly afraid if you peg them as a millennial, they're not going to get to move forward. Tension in the workplace between boomers and millennials is actually decreasing productivity by 12%. Now, ironically, the boomers raised the millennials, but when you get them in the workplace together, there's a certain kind of tension that happens, and we're going to talk about why that might be a little later on. And then if we come at this topic from a whole different perspective, research has found that teams with only a 10-year age span, so one generation sitting around the table, those teams meet or exceed expectations 35% of the time. Now you expand that to 25 years or more, so a multi-generational team, and those teams meet or exceed expectations 73% of the time. So that's more than double what a multi-generational team can do for you and your organization. And what that means is there's a culturally intelligent leader of that team who knows how to bring out the best of every generation. I coach a lot of millennials, and they'll say, Katherine, whatever happens, don't make me be on a team with Xers and boomers. They don't get me. I don't even think they like me. Please don't make me do it. You get those millennials on a team with Xers and boomers who know how to communicate with them and value them and make them feel respected, they flourish. Okay? They're hungry to learn. That's one of my favorite things about that generation. They want to grow. They're voracious learners. And if you're someone that respects them and values them, they want to learn from you. Okay? They're ready. Okay, so before we go any further, I always like to put this disclaimer out. Whoa. We're not trying to stereotype anybody today. Okay, put anybody in a box. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. I think millennials feel that more than anyone because Time magazine labeled them as lazy, narcissistic, and entitled. And quite honestly, they're like, that's not who we are. Please quit saying that. But that's an assumption that a lot of us make. So that's the exact opposite of what we want to do. But we are going to talk about meta trends, things that resonate across each generation that seem to make sense to most people. Now, just because I'm a Gen Xer doesn't mean everything we say today perfectly fits who I am. It depends on what country you grew up in. What state did you grow up in? Even what city? Were you rural or urban, right? There's all these different things that play into this. So when we have this conversation, think about it as a framework or a perspective that you're looking through, this filter that helps us understand how our culture has changed over time and why a baby boomer shows up in your workplace with different ways they communicate and different things they value that is very different than the way our Gen Zers who are here today are going to show up in your workplace and the ways they communicate and the things they value. Those are very different worlds that shape them. Okay? And one paradigm shift a lot of people have found really helpful, so I want to make sure I said this today, is if we step back and for a moment we start to think about the generations as different cultures. Right? So imagine for just a moment that the traditionalists grew up on that island over there. The boomers grew up on this island. I'm standing on the Gen X island. There's a millennial island, a Gen Z island. What's the next generation? Anyone know? After our Zers? Alpha, Gen Alpha. Some people want to call them Gen COVID. I'm like, don't do that. Please don't do that, right? That would be terrible, okay? So if I'm going, as a Gen Xer, if I go visit the traditionalist island, I'm going to expect that they're going to do things differently on that island than they do on my island. And what's happening right now is we're so busy going, gosh, we live in the same city, we work for the same company, but you're not doing things the way I expect you to do them. And we get angry, we get triggered, we feel emotional about it, we take it very personally. And if we stop for a second and we said, you grew up on a different island than I did. So you see the world differently than the way I do. Just for a second, I want you all to imagine a month from now, you're about to visit a culture or a country that you've never been to before. Okay, someplace where they do things really different than they do in Green Bay, Wisconsin. All right, what are some of the things you would do to prepare?
Research.
Okay, research. What would you research?
Their cultural norms.
Okay, how do they do things? Okay, how do I need to behave? What's something I should do, and what are the things I shouldn't do? Right? What else? Language. Okay, yeah, you want to be able to navigate the culture. Okay. What else? History. What formed them? How'd they come to be the culture that they are today? Do you notice how all three of those responses, people are being curious about where they're going, about the people they're about to interact with. So if we start to shift the generational conversation and we start to be curious about somebody else instead of pointing fingers at somebody else, now we can start to have a conversation. And I'll tell you, one of the things about millennials and Gen Zers, they'll tell you how they feel. They'll share with you what they're thinking, especially if you create a safe space for them to do that and you're not pointing your finger at them. Wow, you can have some incredible conversations and really move the ball forward when you're trying to create a multi-generational workforce where people show up and can really flourish. Okay? So here's where we're at today. Now, if we, I know what I wanted to tell you real quick is with leadership across the generations, I did not want to forget this, all right? So I actually ended up doing my dissertation research on millennials and teams, okay? And I used to teach leadership development for 10 years at a university. And every year I would ask them, what's the best form of leadership? I give them three choices: authoritative, democratic, and laissez-faire. One year they all raised their hand at laissez-faire leadership. Now, as a Gen Xer, I was like, wow, do you know what happens when it's you do you leadership? Like, do you know what kind of chaos that leads to? Right? So I became fascinated by this, and so I dug into a bunch of research. And one of the things that went to the top, right, that kind of came out of the research, if you think about how the different generations approach leadership. The traditionalists had a war going on, so top-down hierarchical leadership made a lot of sense. It's a crisis situation, I give you an order, you follow it, there's not a lot of time for questions. Then the boomers came into the workplace. The workplace became very political. There were over 80 million boomers, many of whom were trying to get to the top of that corporate ladder. So as a boomer, if I'm in this room trying to work us all towards a goal, my job is to lead by consensus. I want to get us all publicly on the same page to agree where we're headed and how we're going to get there. And as a boomer, I'm never going to lean over to my colleague and say, Katherine, she's the worst boss ever. I would never do that. That's so inappropriate in a boomer world, because the boss is the boss and the boss deserves my automatic respect. I may go home and complain to my spouse about my boss, but I would never do it in the workplace. Then Gen X arrives on the scene. Who knows another name for Gen Xers when we were kids?
Lost generation?
Yes?
Lost generation.
Yes, that's a good guess. It's not the one I'm looking for, but good guess.
Latchkey.
Latchkey, you got it. So what that meant is the divorce rate had tripled. There were many more women in the workplace. So many Gen Xers found themselves coming home with a literal key tied around their neck. They let themselves in, which is illegal in many states today. They did their homework, they made dinner, they babysat their younger siblings, and they watched a heck of a lot of MTV. So leadership for Gen X starts to become more of an art. It's something I learn as I go, and there's skills I acquire along the way, because I never know when I'm going to need them. Gen X also looks at the world through a filter of relationships. They learned very early on that neighbor A is there for this crisis, neighbor B is there for this crisis, and I need to keep those relationships intact because I never know when I'm going to need them. When COVID hit, we did a huge generational study, and Gen X, far and above every generation, said their number one way to cope with all of this was through those solid foundational relationships. The millennials arrive on the scene, and the leadership pendulum has swung almost all the way over here from where it was with the traditionalists. And as a millennial, I'm happy for Tim to come up here and take over. If maybe he knows more information than I do, or maybe he's simply a better communicator, because I believe we should all work out of our best strengths. I also, as a millennial, believe that leadership is more of a role that I hold where I'm a facilitator. So right now in this moment, I have more responsibility than all of you. But millennials are very clear that just because I have more responsibility doesn't mean I have any more value than you do. We are all equals. And millennials really look through that filter of equality. Now, I've had CEOs stop me and say, Katherine, my executive coach just got done telling me that when I walk in a room, I need to make sure everyone knows I'm in charge. I said, oh, how's that working for you? It says not working at all, right? And so what you have is this entire generation of boomers who've learned and become highly proficient in leading in a certain way, and their very children are going, yeah, that doesn't really work for us. Okay? So there can be a lot of rub right there across the generations in your workplace. So to frame out our conversation, the traditionalists built many of the organizations that currently exist. Then the boomers came in, they shaped the values and beliefs within those organizations. And then Gen X, we created a lot of the current systems. We started to create some change in terms of workplace flexibility, but there are only 60 million Gen Xers. There are over 80 million boomers, over 80 million millennials. So Gen X, we are small but mighty. So while we try to create some change, overall, we joined the status quo. We learned the rules, and we learned to play by the rules. So what you have in many companies today is a literal status quo that has existed for more than half a century. This is how we do it. Get on board. Right? Then millennials showed up, and we hear things like Zipcar did a survey and found that 65% of millennials would be more upset to lose their phone or their computer than their car. Now you tell that to a baby boomer and they're like, are you kidding me? I know down to the last penny I scraped together to buy that first car. That car meant total independence. And now we have a generation behind millennials, our Gen Zers. Many of them are in absolutely no hurry to get their driver's license. Anyone have kids that fit that? Okay. You're not alone. Okay. How many of you have walked into your kid's bedroom and they're doing their homework and you're having a conversation and you realize, oh, Sally's right there in the room with you, right? Because they're doing their homework together over FaceTime, right? They have a very different way of gathering together than obviously older generations did. Gallup has found that millennial turnover is actually costing the US economy over $30 billion every year. Millennials stay at a job for about 3 years and then they bounce. That's what they call it, bouncing. And many of them are kind of in perpetual pursuit of that job that can give them that perfect work-life balance. So this is where that rub around loyalty comes in. Right? Baby boomers stayed at a job their whole career. They got what in return? The gold watch and the pension. Right? There was a relationship. There was a reason for me to stay as an employee. Now, most millennials will say, Katherine, especially after COVID, because things have changed so fast, they're like, I don't know if my company's going to be around in 10 years. I don't know if my job's going to be around in 5 years. We just don't think that far ahead. I have Gen Zers telling me, Katherine, I don't know if the planet's going to be around in 10 years. Okay, they have a whole nother kind of anxiety they're dealing with. All right. So here are our Gen Zers. Okay, they were in the workforce for about a year, and then COVID hit. So their world was turned upside down. Many of them missed these monumental moments they've been waiting on. Many of them are reporting they still haven't even met their colleagues in person. So they feel a lot of anxiety about even being able to move up within their company, because if the CEO never sees me, right, how are they going to know who I am? How am I going to get ahead and network? And so it's really cool that you all are here today. Okay? But their anxiety is at an all-time high. Right? I heard a stat last summer that 25% of 18 to 24-year-olds are actually experiencing suicidal thoughts. So if you have a Gen Zer in your life, spend time with them, listen to them. One thing you need to know about this generation, we're going to talk about why this is in just a minute, but one thing they'll tell you is that telling is yelling. If you can remember that about them today, it will help you. Telling is yelling. They want to have conversations with you. They want to be brought into the process. And there's a lot of, well, this is what you should do, and this is how you should do it, and this is what you should believe. And they're going, yeah, that just shuts me down. Right? So build that bridge. Really listen to your Gen Zers in a very compassionate way. They're carrying a lot on their shoulders. And I think we're going to see them come through this in a really, really strong way. When we talk about generations, Howe and Strauss first brought this theory to the table in the early 90s, and they divided the generations into about every 20 years, and then they talked about those collective memories that we all share during those formative experiences, right? Or during those formative years. So if we just touch on technology today, many traditionalists did not grow up with indoor plumbing. For boomers, the TV was a huge innovation. Gen X, I literally remember my mother saying, we'll never get a microwave. She was terrified of it. And then millennials, obviously, the cell phone has changed everything. If we think about communication, we had a lot of hippies saying groovy. Gen X, dude, that's awesome. Millennials brought in the acronym. What's this one mean? You only live once. And I always tell the boomers, if there's acronyms flying around your workplace and you're not sure what they mean, there's a thing called the Urban Dictionary. You can Google them, but I give you fair warning, sometimes it's quite terrifying when you really learn what some of these acronyms mean. And then our Gen Zers, one of the things they brought us is emojis. In 2015, this emoji, the tears of joy emoji, was the word of the year. It has now become the most commonly used emoji in North America. So much so, do you think Gen Zers really use it anymore? No, not cool, right? And whether you know it or not, the Gen Zers in your life, they screenshot your texts, they post them on Snapchat, they text them to their friends, and they make fun of you, okay? They give you a mom pass and they give you a dad pass because they love you, but they make fun of you, right? When you send a text with 3 thumbs up, how do they interpret that? They're like, that's a little extra, Mom, just one. Just one's enough. Use a period in a text with a Gen Zer. What does that say to them? What?
You're anal.
You're anal, right? You're using good grammar, right? And they're like, that's actually, it's mean, it's harsh, it's very final. If you've ever looked at their text, it's just this string of thoughts, right? They may use an occasional question mark, and an exclamation point means you're doing something well, right? But I have parents going, I sent my kid the tears of joy emoji and they sent me back a skull. Should I be concerned? No, that's actually kind of cool now, right? It means what? What, Peyton?
It's funny.
Right, it's funny. Like, I'm dead. It's so funny I'm dead, right? So it's okay. It's okay. So one thing to remember is if you are not a Gen Zer, you will never think the way they do. You grew up in an entirely different world. And so if you want to learn about them, you have to ask them questions because you will not intuitively understand their world. All right? So now, and I forgot to mention, there's booklets in the middle of your table. So this is kind of highlighted in there. If you want to use it, that's fine. If not, that's okay. So now I'm going to quickly go through And I have till 4:20, right? Okay, good. So a strength, a do, a don't, and a growth edge of each generation. So for our boomers, one of their greatest strengths is understanding context. They can read the air and they know that over 80% of what I'm saying is not the words coming out of my mouth. It's all the other things that go with it. So I always tell my millennials and Gen Zers, if you're not sure why a meeting went south, ask a boomer. They'll say, did you notice 5 minutes in, John had that crooked smile on his face? That meant your idea wasn't going to go anywhere, right? They are brilliant at this. Listen to boomers. They've been around. They have a lot to share. Most boomers will share, Katherine, or they'll say, Katherine, I want to share what I have up here, but I want to do it with people who respect it and are going to do something positive with it. Now, millennials and Gen Zers, even if you don't like the package it comes in, I guarantee you there's golden nuggets coming at you if you have that relationship. So pay attention. Don't downplay their sacrifice. I hear this especially from female boomers who've really made it to the top of their game. They'll say, you know, Katherine, I want to mentor these millennials and Zers, I really do. But they have no idea what I went through when I was their age. Now, what I say to that boomer is that's like telling your kids you walked uphill to school both ways, right? Like, they're never going to care. Younger generations never going to fully get it. But what I say to millennials and Gen Zers is imagine if you sat down face to face with a baby boomer, that's their preferred style of communication, sat down face to face and said, what was it like for you? What did you sacrifice along the way? And thank you for doing that so I could start out today where I am. 20 minutes of your time, imagine the bridge that would build with that baby boomer and how they would feel heard, how they would feel valued. Growth edge for boomers. You've been solving problems for quite a while and you're really good at it. Make sure you're doing more listening than talking. A lot of millennials will say, yeah, I went to my boss, I got 2 sentences out, and then they were telling me what I should do and how to fix it, right? So remember, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. Do a lot of listening so that they keep coming back with you because they want to tell you more. Because if we're not listening to younger generations, we're going to miss out on how to be innovative and how to move things forward. And clearly, we are all aware that the world is changing at a very rapid pace. Okay. Gen X, this defines our generation. What do you see? Michelle kind of touched on this. What do you not see? Exactly. Gen X is not even there. CBSN did a short blurb on the generations, and they literally left our generation out. We are known as the forgotten generation, and this is how many Gen Xers currently feel in your workplace. Everybody's working so hard to keep their top performing millennial talent that they're actually promoting their millennials over their Xers. Xers are going, seriously? I've been here 15, 20, 25 years. You're going to promote that millennial over me? Really? Okay, go ahead. Watch what happens when I leave your organization. Watch how many plates fall because you have no idea how much I do that's not actually on my job description. Harvard Business Review published a study, found that 40% of Gen X leaders in their companies want to leave their company, and this is one of the primary reasons why. We've all had breakfasts and lunches and dinners for our millennial employees because we've learned they want to be heard, right? Their voices need to be heard. When's the last time you asked a Gen Xer what they want? Most Gen Xers wouldn't even know how to answer this because, quite honestly, no one has ever asked us. One of the primary reasons for that is because one of the greatest strengths of the Gen X generation is that overdeveloped sense of responsibility. They are often the ones within your organization that are going to come in and fill in the gaps. Somebody dropped that plate, oh, no problem, I'll pick it up. And they've got all these plates spinning in the air. Okay. Those of you that have more than one kid, If one of those kids is more responsible than the others, that's the kid that probably gets a little bit less attention. That's what's happening to Gen Xers. Be direct with Gen X. Don't beat around the bush. They don't need fluff. They don't need all that millennials often talk about. We want the compliment sandwich. Xers are like, forget that. Just tell me what I need to do. Let me move on. Don't micromanage your Gen Xers. That's like squashing their soul. Okay? We're very self-motivated. Why? As a latchkey kid, there's no one else around that's going to do this for me. I need to figure it out. Right? And then the growth edge for Xers, because we are known as the get-it-done generation. We used to be known as the slackers, by the way. Now we're the get-it-done generation. So there's hope for every generation, right? But because we're such a get-it-done generation, the people that work under us often feel like we don't trust them. They'll say, yeah, my Gen X boss sends me emails at 2 a.m. and those are things I could do for them. But clearly they don't trust me enough to let me. When really in the Gen X mind, it's like, no, I can just get it done really quickly. Let me take care of it. So we have to keep that in mind and remember that everybody wants to be empowered to do the things that they're meant to do. All right, I want to touch on emails real quick, especially when it comes to, before we transition to our millennials. I often hear from millennials, I got an email from my boomer boss, and it was a letter. It was a literal book, and they go TLDR, which means what? Too long, didn't read, right? They're like, I don't have time for that, right? Typical Gen X email, what does it look like? Text or straight to the point, bullet points, right? Here's what you need to do, go get it done. Millennials are often like, Xers are really rude. Like they didn't even say hello, they don't give any context, right? They get kind of frustrated. Now, one thing we need to remember about emails in the workplace is that different generations have a different perspective on emails. So for millennials and Gen Zers, especially Zers, right? Emails serve the purpose of being used for something where they need to document something very important. But it's not a way to have a conversation. And don't make me respond to a group email, right? There's got to be something in it for me if I'm even going to think about responding. Okay. Now, one thing I want to make note of when I have a multi-generational audience is when an Xer or boomer sends you an email, it's because they're trying to communicate something to you. And they've actually put time in that email, and they would like a response. Many of them, when they don't get a response, they feel like they're being disrespected, or you're not really a team player, you don't really care about the project at hand. Where in a millennial mind, they're actually the first generation on average to open up the email that you send out. And they open it up, they read the first sentence and the last sentence. Then they close it back up, and they go, do I need to respond to that? If I do, I'm going to wait until I have all the information necessary so I can give you the response that you deserve. Right? Now, older generations are like, no, really, I need a response. Okay? So when I used to teach leadership development, at the end of the school year, now this is when millennials were in college, we would put on a high school leadership conference. Right? So I would be texting them throughout the year with different things we had to get done. And I would get zero response. So I finally pulled them all together, and I said, you all have to respond to me, right? I'm spinning this plate. I'm passing you the plate when I text you. I need to know you caught the plate so that I'm not the one spinning it anymore. So for some reason, they decided on the camel emoji. No particular reason for the camel, that's just what they chose. All right, so all they'd have to do is send me back the camel emoji. I knew we're good to go. I still, to this day, get text messages from some of my former students saying, Katherine, I am my boss's favorite employee because I respond to everything they send me. So something that small can make a huge difference in the workplace. And if we don't understand each other's preferences, then we can be creating tension unknowingly. Millennials, one of their greatest strengths is that sense of confidence. I can do anything, I can be anything. They were told this since they were small children. I think it's a pretty cool trait. Whenever I meet a millennial who's been in the company for more than 3 years, I'm like, tell me why. What's keeping you there? And they'll say, you know, Katherine, we want a good salary, we want a good title, but more importantly, we want growth opportunities. And when millennials talk about growth, they're not just talking about professional growth, they also want personal growth. It's a very holistic view of development. Now, Gen Xers, we did not, on average, receive any kind of leadership development until we were 40 years old. Millennials are like, oh, no way, I'm not waiting that long, like I want to grow now, and certainly Zers, right? That's one of the biggest things for them if they're deciding whether or not they want to work for you, is are you going to provide opportunities for professional development? Because I want to get to where I want to go. So just know that they want to be their best selves wherever they are, and so don't just grow me as a professional, also as a person. Then obviously we know they want flexibility and that greater sense of purpose. Don't dictate, negotiate. This is not a generation that grew up being told, do this because I said so. Millennials are actually the first generation to call their parents their friends. Right? And this shows itself in the workplace. Okay? When boomers were growing up, children were to be seen and not heard. So they brought that value and belief into the workplace, and that's how the boss interacted with their employees, right? I hired you to do a job, go do it, sit behind your computer for 8 hours, whatever. I don't need to hear from you, just get your job done. Now at the same time, they said, I had one, maybe two parents that didn't really care about how I felt about anything. So I will not raise my children that way. So they swung the pendulum all the way over here. So when millennials were growing up, they would come home and they'd sit around the dinner table with their parents and they'd have back and forth, friend-to-friend conversations. Well, Dad, how's it going at work with Bob, that employee that's been driving you nuts? What are you doing? Dad would answer, then Dad would ask about school or soccer practice. Add to that, Bob the boomer's growing up. Dad comes home. He says, Bob, I got a new job in Atlanta. We're moving next Friday. Pack your stuff. Bob has no choice. Bob packs his stuff. Family moves to Atlanta. Fast forward to millennials. Mom comes home from work. Mom says, hey kids, I got a job offer in Atlanta. Do you want to move to Atlanta? How would that impact your college career? What about sports, friends? What do y'all think? If the kids said, we don't want to move to Atlanta, then there's a really good chance that family didn't move to Atlanta. So millennials are used to their thoughts, feelings, and opinions being intentionally sought after, and then they're used to them also bearing weight on the decisions that are made. Okay, so we've got to keep this in mind. Often in performance reviews, we'll just pick on boomers in this moment, right? The boomer boss has given that millennial feedback in their annual review that is very important to the boomers, right? And that millennials halfway through starts giving the boomer feedback. Now that often doesn't go very well. The boomer can feel disrespected. Then the millennial's going, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just having a back and forth conversation just like I would with my parents. So millennials, how are you seeking to understand the context of work situations? Really quick story. There's an increasing trend. Gallup just released some research a few months ago where you're kind of elder millennials, right? They're also called zennials, if any of you have heard of these. These are the ones that still had an analog childhood, and then they had the digital adulthood. There's kind of this trust but verify attitude that they have with their CEO, their boss, and the organization. Okay, let me give you a quick story. So millennial employee comes to we'll use Gen X boss, okay? And they have this amazing tech idea that they want to integrate. And the Gen X boss is going, yeah, I hear you. However, I'm just trying to make payroll. Okay? So millennial goes, yeah, whatever, you're just old. You don't get it. You don't want to change, right? And so what can happen is the Gen Xer can feel disrespected by that. Or they can go, millennials lasted about a job for 3 years. And this millennial's bringing me some awesome information. Like, this is really going to help my company. I can't really afford it right now, right? So they shift their paradigm. And then they say, okay, trust but verify. So if I bring in someone from the outside to verify my decision and the way I'm thinking about this, that might help this millennial get on board. So they bring in someone from the outside to talk about business finances, kind of the ebb and flow, the goals they have to hit throughout the year. Now the millennial's going, oh, okay, I hear you, I got you, that makes a lot of sense. Right? Because this generation was told, if you go to college, life is going to be grand. And then they've watched the economy go like this. So they have a lot of questions, and they're not just innately offering you their trust. They want other things that are going to help back it up. Okay? So don't take it personally. It's not necessarily about you. It's really kind of the context of the world within which they've been formed, which is very different than the boomer world, right? Or the Gen X world, for that matter. So our Zers, one of their greatest strengths is that sense of resourcefulness. They are the do-it-yourself generation. Over 71% of them are saying if you want to get something done right, do it yourself. Okay? And over 85% of them go to YouTube every day where they're learning something new for free. Face-to-face. Believe it or not, 75% of them want to work face-to-face with their colleagues. Now, many of the parents I talk to are like, that can't be true. My kid's in front of their screen all the time. When it comes to the workplace, they do. They want to rub shoulders with you. They very much have an apprenticeship mindset where they want to study and practice and study and practice. And you're the people they want to check in with. Don't put them in a box. This is the most diverse generation in history. Interethnic marriages are at an all-time high. If I was in a room full of Gen Zers and I said, what does diversity mean to you? They would go, everything, right? It's not just the color of your skin, it's your sexual orientation, it's your gender, it's your socioeconomic status, it's the way you think about things, right? They expect diversity, they're used to diversity, and they want to be in places where they feel like their diversity is present. And then the big question they're asking in your workplace is, can I trust you? They've grown up in a world where they know that everything they read and learn online is simply not true. And so they want solid relationships with people they can look in the eye and know that they can trust you. And so if you're leading them, that's one of the biggest things they're asking themselves every day when they meet with you. This generation expects change. This is the world they grew up in. Something new almost every year that has drastically changed the way that we all communicate and do life. This is a mantra they've heard since they were small children. They deeply care about people and the planet, and they want to know that you do too. And they're choosing to work for companies where their values are aligned with who they are as people. And if they don't understand how what they're doing every day ties to making the world a better place, they're probably not going to stay. And imagine if your mindset right now is the world's not going to be around in 10 years. They want to spend their time making that world a better place. Now this slide, sorry, it always gets a little off when I transfer them. I apologize for that. This slide is interesting. So if you notice how much money they directly spend versus how much they indirectly influence other people to spend, one of the biggest reasons for that is because Gen Z is the first generation to call their parents their best friends. They're the first generation to wear the same clothes as their parents, and the first generation to listen to the same music as their parents. They're actually delaying adulthood even longer than millennials did. Why? Because a lot of them just love being with their parents. Okay? You're going to have, this is already happening. Some of you may have had this happen. You'll have parents showing up at job interviews. Okay? LinkedIn had a bring your parent to work day. Okay? So it may be coming in your direction. Just be ready for that, right? This is where we're currently at. About half of our workforce is millennial and Gen Z. So if you're not thinking about them and trying to make your culture a place that they want to be and a place where they can thrive, you're really missing the mark, and you're going to fall behind. So change is happening. We have to leverage the strengths of every generation. Every generation brings incredible strengths, and there's no generation right now that can do it on our own. And if you look at your leadership team or who's at your board meetings every month, right? Who's represented? Whose voices are you listening to? That doesn't mean you have to have a Gen Zer sitting on your board, but man, I want Gen Zers in the room telling me their thoughts on different topics that we're addressing, because they're the ones that can give us a bigger picture of where the future is taking us. You have to raise awareness that in many of our companies, we literally have 5 different cultures trying to operate and work alongside of each other. If people don't understand that, they're not going to be working to build bridges. And then bias, I'll touch on this really fast. How many of you have ever heard someone in your workplace go, "Oh, you're such a millennial"? Or #OKBoomer, which means you're 40 and over, you're completely irrelevant, you have no idea how the world works. Okay? Which, by the way, that includes Gen Xers, everybody. We just lump them into boomer world, right? And that also includes some of our millennials. Millennials are now in their 40s. Here's my challenge to you. When we make these statements about age, we kind of think they're funny, we laugh them off, we let them roll off our shoulders. But would you make those same comments in any other area of diversity? Would you say to me today, "Oh, Katherine, well, you're such a woman"? You wouldn't imagine saying that, but you'd say it about a millennial. Do you think that makes that millennial excited to be on your team? Excited to be in your company? Probably not, because it means you're lumping them in with all these other people, right? And you're not allowing them to be who they really are. And then, how are you building intergenerational community? Okay, a lot of companies do mentoring. Have you ever thought about mutual mentoring, where boomers are mentoring millennials and those millennials feel all the freedom to mentor them right back? Right? It changes the culture. It makes us more open to learn from one another instead of just keeping it top down. And then finally, lifelong learning. It took the phone 120 years to reach 1 billion people. It took Facebook 8 years to reach 1 billion people. So the world is changing, and the world is changing fast. This is also the first time in history that younger generations are actually teaching older generations about the way the world works. It used to be if I was having an issue, I had a struggle, I needed some wisdom, I'd go to my grandparents, and they been there, done that, they'd help me navigate it. Now, if I want to stay relevant and I want to learn about TikTok and Reels, right, all these things, I'm not going to my grandparents, I'm going to my Gen Zers. Okay, so we all need one another. And how are you creating these spaces within your organization and on your team where every single generation can thrive? All right, so do you want me to put the questions up? You want me to wait? How do you want to transition that?
I think, why don't you put the questions up? I've notified everyone virtually that when your presentation ends, they will unfortunately be disconnected because they're not here in person.
Okay. So what we're going to move to, you'll notice you were seated at a table, a multi-generational table. So I'm going to give you an opportunity in this moment, right? When we apply what we learn, it usually sticks in our heads a little bit better. So now, if some tables need some help, we can shuffle people around. in terms of the intergenerations. So what we want you to do for the next probably 10, 12 minutes, you don't have to answer all these questions. You can pick 2 questions as a table, whatever you want to do, and then listen to the different responses across the generations. Now, I know there's a lot of Xers in the room, so Xers, try not to dominate the talk, let the other generations, because it's easy to kind of start getting nostalgic and, you know, sharing your own perspective. So make sure that you're giving everybody a chance to talk and share their perspective. And then we're going to come back and we'll see if anybody learned something new today. Okay? Any questions about that? Everybody understand your assignment? Okay.